While they are coming up on stage, let me please introduce them. We have Florence Zhu, if you can just make a wave so that everybody knows who you are, Strategic Operation Manager from Envision AESC. We also have Jean-François Gaillot on this side. Jean-François Gaillot, Head of Mineral Department at the French Ministry of Ecological Transition. We also have Laurent Néry over here. Laurent Néry, you are Head of Global Market Analysis at ENGIE, and also Aaron Noose, your Senior VP, Chief Marketing and Strategy Officer at Freeport LNG. And last but not least, we have Sylvain Eckart, Head of Metals and Mining at NATIXIS CIB. And we have a special guest, also our second moderator, who is live with us from New York. Hello to you. James Kaiser, you are based in New York, and thank you very much for joining, at least now with us live from New York. So the floor is yours, Sylvain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina, and thank you, Jean-François, for the good introduction to the panel, which I'm going to repeat a little bit, but the invasion of Russia and its impact on energy security have been a wake-up call, particularly to Europe when it comes to energy supply. Nonetheless, the long-term goals remain to shift from fossil fuel to renewable. It's been temporarily eclipsed by the need for energy security and the impact of very material reduction of gas supply to Europe. This raises a question as to how we're going to get through the energy crisis while delivering on the net zero pledges and maintaining access to reliable and affordable energy, without which some social and political instability could surface. The situation is likely to accelerate the transition to clean energy, and that will force, reliance on some other commodities, namely metals and more generally critical minerals, which are key to produce the low carbon technologies, so that renewables, batteries, electrification in general. These in turn will be also caught up in global supply chain bottlenecks. And with that, I'm going to hand over to James to ask the question for the first theme, which is going to be the impact of the Russian crisis on the gas market. Over to you, James.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Gas supply from Russia has been dwindling, as evidenced by Nord Stream's reverse flow, and recently just completely shutting down, required extensive maintenance and potential political actions. Can you briefly present ENGIE GEMS and give us a brief overview or hindsight of gas markets as they exist today in Europe?
Yes, of course. So GEMS stands for Global Energy Management and Sales. So basically in ENGIE, we used to say that we are the midstreamer of the group. We are connecting the business unit that produces electricity and to the clients. And for the gas business, we are actually managing the long-term contracts and serving the gas to the clients at the right moment when they need it. So we are as well the operator of the group on the financial energy markets to give services for especially the upstream business when it comes to hedge production in the future. Regarding the European natural gas markets, as it was said, it's like a Fukushima for us. Russian gas was representing 40% of European Union pipe gas imports 1 year ago. We currently stand at 8%. And in 1 year, we managed to deal with those missing volumes. So obviously the LNG market has been key to replace those volumes. We mentioned indeed that the infrastructures business on the gas infrastructures was flexible enough first to reverse the flows, because in Europe the gas received from Russia comes from the east and we consume mainly on the western countries, France, Germany, Belgium, the United Kingdom. And when we receive LNG, we need to reverse the flow and send the gas from the west to the east. So this is for our colleagues from the infrastructure business, the transportation system operators. that managed to do it, showing a flexibility in this system. And second, we need to import much more LNG. Indeed, we need time to develop new onshore LNG terminal, 3 to 4 years. But we know as well that there is flexible unit, which is called floating storage regasification unit. It's some vessel that you can connect directly to the gas network. And some countries like the Netherlands, in 6 months, they managed to lease two of these boats. And in the coming months, we will have in Germany, in Italy, in the eastern countries of European Union, more and more on this unit that will put the LNG where we need it. But something that we did not mention is the demand response. And this is one of the bad news of the past weeks, is that, yes, indeed, we have more supply from LNG, but our industrial are suffering, and they are using less gas. Some of them can switch to other type of energies, but others are slowing down their production. And this is a real challenge for the next weeks is how the small consumers, the households, will reduce their consumption, and how much energy we can save in the residential sector to allow the industrial one to run and to get through this winter with, as we said, there is a lot of gas in store. We cannot start better this winter, but with the gas story, you never know what can happen in the coming weeks. So it will be a matter indeed of weather, of demand response, to see how much gas we will get at the end of the winter when it really matters.
Thanks very much. Very, very interesting and very thoughtful response. Aaron, how do you see LNG markets developing in the U.S. from an export perspective? And what sort of structural shifts have you been witnessing since the upheavals that have occurred between Russia and the Ukraine?
Sure. Thanks, Jim. I think that one thing that needs to be recognized before we even get to what's happened since the war is that really over the last 5 to 8 years, there's been underinvestment in LNG globally relative to what was going to be needed for the energy transition. Natural gas is cleaner burning fuel, replacing globally coal and other dirtier sources. And so there was already ever increasing demand from emerging market nations, from Asia generally, to try to supplant dirtier burning fuels. So there was already underinvestment on that basis. Once the war started, that materially exacerbated the situation, given now what was a much higher demand based on adding the layer of energy security to it, which is obviously what this whole panel is about. So what occurred from there is you now had demand coming from every angle. And yes, there's absolutely been a demand response with prices just being far too high for people to even use, but it doesn't need to be that way. With proper investment in the sector and proper foresight and planning and making sure that the asset's actually there, there'll be plenty of energy for people to actually have what they need. So, as a result, Jim, even before the war, the prospects of various US LNG projects were definitely improving, but now that's gone on a much more accelerated pace. And, you ask about structural shifts. I don't know if I would call them structural shifts. What I'd call them is people, at least at the moment, and it's going to be very interesting to see how things evolve over the next 6 to 12 months, people trying to take advantage of something that arguably isn't there. So what do I mean by that? Well, there was already talk about supply chain constraints, extensive talk about inflation and rising interest rates. Well, LNG projects are $4 to $5 billion large capital projects. We are highly susceptible to all of those issues. But because of that underinvestment that took place over time, because of what happened during the market in COVID, there's still a view that LNG prices should be much cheaper than in reality it takes to compensate for the capital cost associated. So that's something where people are going to have to adjust their expectations. There's just a reality around what these things are going to cost. So you talk about structural shifts. Well, what I would tell you is going on right now is in order to gain momentum and in order to make it look like there's the word of the hour, hope, from before, that there's a lot of contracts being signed, there's a lot of discussions being had around what ultimately are going to be unachievable levels, and contract renegotiation is going to happen on those bases before those projects can actually get to FID. Now, at the end of the day, it's all going to happen because the need for the LNG is so strong, and the price changes I'm talking about relative to what's actually going on in Europe right now is not going to amount to a whole lot. But it's something that needs to that really needs to be taken into account. You've seen construction models change in LNG a little bit, but it's TBD whether that project, really the model itself worked, or the sky-high LNG prices at the moment were a great contributing factor in them being a success. I think otherwise what you're seeing is people acknowledging the fact that they're going to sign up to low prices and then adjust them later once they get their EPC prices, once they get their interest rates, and they can look. The one thing that hasn't changed at all is that the projects that are trying to move forward need long-term contracts. That's just an unassailable fact for a $5 billion contract, that the only way you're going to make that project take place is if you're signing up to a very long-term, robust take-or-pay contract, and that aspect has, no one has tried to get away from that.
So that's an interesting follow-up, Aaron, and you made an allusion to lack of investment, and obviously if you are an off-taker, you need to commit to that type of investment for long periods of time. And as you also mentioned, the viability of the export facilities are pinned on long-term contracts with creditworthy off-takers. How do you see contracting environments now, particularly in Europe and Asia, which have been the traditional, Asia more so the traditional landing spot for LNG, but Europe now becoming increasingly important?
Sure. So during that whole period of underinvestment, one of the main reasons for it is people wanted LNG, but they wanted to buy it at 8, 10-year flexible contracts. And a joke I've made many times to many people that know me recently is like, unless people have different versions of Microsoft Excel, like the math comes out the same way, and it just doesn't work. So what you've seen now, and what's really been interesting since the war started, is the people in every Houston office signing up to their LNG off-take contracts first were the Asians, because they all had mandates to buy 20-year LNG. They were just trying to get the terms as flexible as they could, but they had the mandates. So as soon as the war started, they said, I'm getting in there first. I'm going to get the cheapest LNG I possibly can first, and that's what I'm going to do. Second you've seen is portfolio players like Engie and the majors. They acted quickly. They've been acting quickly, and they're taking huge volumes. Now, why are they doing that? Well, they're doing that because the parties that haven't acted are the European utilities. They want short-term contracts, which candidly are just undeliverable for even brownfield expansions or greenfield projects. And they want them because they're really trying to get off of fossil fuels. But realistically, especially with clean burning natural gas and the environmental attributes that it has, that's not going to happen within the scope of these contracts. And at a minimum, they should be looking at these contracts from the perspective of an insurance policy if the green revolution does not happen as quickly as they want, so they don't end up in a situation where they're at right now. So, but long-term contracts are imperative, and that's what people have been realizing.
Great. Thanks very much, Aaron. Very, very insightful. Laurent, how do you deal with the current crisis as you see it? And what are the impacts of energy transition on other sources of energy that perhaps were discounted? Coal, nuclear, thermal. Thermal and nuclear that had probably been discounted at one point in time. How do you see them today?
Yeah. So for NG, the diversification is our DNA. We used to have a lot of different long-term gas suppliers, and our power energy mix is diversified. When you look at the company that got bankrupt in the gas market, it's Uniper. It's 80% Russian gas importers, and in France, it's EDF with a very high level of nuclear. So the diversification is key. Then for the crisis, obviously, we need to anticipate as much as possible and to think to the unthinkable. So far so good, but we touch wood because we don't know what will happen, and we have much more uncertainties. And for us, it's a wake-up call for politicians that have been probably underplayed the energy topic for years, but it's as well an opportunity for us to get more quickly to the net zero target, to understand that when energy will become scarce, it will be expensive. So I hope that every one of you knows how much it consumes every year in electricity. But I hope that for next year, everyone will check its electricity bills and see how it can reduce the power. At this stage, everyone knows how much its car is consuming, but for its home, it's a bit more remote. But it's the real revolution that we need to make, that everyone understands that by reducing a bit its power consumption for some period of time, it will help the system. Regarding, so to me, the coal will serve obviously for the next 2 winters because we have an issue with the French nukes. But the real fossil bridge energy is natural gas that will need to be greenified. And then obviously the nuke dimension is still a low carbon. When the reactors are working and are safe, it produces baseload electricity. So I would not be surprised to see some politicians changing a bit their mind. The only issue with nukes is the time to lead the construction, and to deal with the current crisis, we should have taken decision 10 years ago. So, but for 2030, definitely there will be more nukes. And then, very important for the flexibility, because of the system, of the power system, we will have batteries, we will have hydrogen, and we will need as well probably to think about the new commodities that will be required to achieve such developments.
Great, thank you. Very insightful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. Moving to electrification, as previously said, electrification of the energy supply is inevitable and will be accelerated by the current conditions. There's 2 key themes in the electrification. The one is the flexibility to cope with the intermittency of renewable, and the electrification of mobility. Moving to you, Florence, and Envision as a key player in that field, could you briefly tell us about the Envision business model, and particularly Envision, as we know it, is building battery factories in Europe, but could you tell us a bit more about the concept of zero emissions integrated industrial parks?
Yeah, thank you, Sylvain. Good afternoon, everyone. Envision is a clean energy technology company that operates in 3 principal domains. The first is that Envision produces the smart wind turbines, and Envision is the world number 4 producers of wind turbines. And Envision also operates the digital solution system that manages the renewable energy consumption and generation. And the third business that we do is the Envision AESC EV batteries, that we produce lithium batteries for vehicles and also for energy storage application. As our speakers mentioned, that the electrification is becoming a key for the energy transition. And we are facing the challenges of coping with the high price of moving to a greener and renewable energy. So that is why Envision has provided the solution of a net zero industrial park for the energy consumption. So in the northern east part of China, where we built our first net zero energy industrial park, we combine the solution of renewable wind power in the area where it's traditionally heavily relying on coal production to production of wind power that can supply to the industrial cluster where we gathered with the production of EV batteries and our upstream suppliers, the refinery of metals, and also our downstream clients that assembles the EV battery into their EVs, into a cluster of industrial park that will be supplied by the wind energy produced nearby at a very competitive cost. At this moment, the levelized cost of electricity produced at our net zero industrial park is around 20 euro per megawatt hour. It is a very competitive price, and at a zero carbon base that can reduce the carbon footprint of the productions of the being the EV batteries or the EV cars that is produced in this cluster. So this is the concept that we develop first in China, and we're also developing the same concept in Europe. We are developing this net zero industrial park in Spain and in France as well. We bring our supply chains to a cluster of industries, and we use the renewable energies produced nearby, managing by the smart digital solutions that can manage the demand and the storage using the energy storage solutions. So that is basically the concept we operate on the net zero industrial park for INVISION.
Thank you very much, Florence. Laurent, I mentioned that flexibility is one of the key to successful deployment of renewable energy. Could you please insist a little bit on the importance of that aspect?
Yeah, so when you manage your power system, you need to produce when people are consuming, and but the wind is not blowing at 7 p.m. Generally on a cold winter day. So the more that you will put renewables into the system, and we need them, the more the needs for flexibility will be. So you have different solutions. Over the short term, actually, we have already a coupling between gas and power networks. Basically, if a country has too much wind, it will reduce its gas-fired power generation and can send back the gas to a country where there is less wind for a given day. And we see exchanges between markets. You maybe heard about the controversy between Spain and France on those gas lines, but there is already a way to exchange electricity through the gas vectors. But when it comes to the future, you have the batteries that can indeed, for short-term, very short-term response, and then indeed with the hydrogen revolution, we might have way of storing electricity cheap, we hope, because we need an affordable energy transition to deliver it during the times where people will consume it.
Thank you, Laurent. Turning to electromobility, Jean-François, France and various other countries are banning the ICEs, the diesel engines, and in order to promote the electrification of the mobility. A couple of questions for you. How do you see the development of not only the electric vehicles, but the electric vehicles ecosystem taking place, and how the government is planning to help the development of that ecosystem, including securing the raw materials?
Good afternoon. So there is a huge challenge that the industry is facing right now to reach the different goals linked to electric vehicle, but also with decarbonization. The first one, as you mentioned, is the huge needs of investment, especially in the gigafactories. If we want to reach the goals that we have set in Europe with the 50-55 objective, we need 38 gigafactory. And this gigafactory, as we see the amount of investment, it's near 150 billion euro of investment without the mining industry. So 70% of the needs that we will have in Europe for the electrification of the vehicle will come from outside Europe, and there are many challenges, and especially 4 of them. The first one is the price of the minerals, but also the explosive demand of them. I could give some figures. Nickel will be multiplied by 3, lithium by 4, rare earths by 3 in their demand for the market. Investment also in the mining industry is at a very low level. We are half of what it was 10 years ago. And as we look at the time we need to build a mine, it's minimum 15 years if we include very good exploration and a quick construction of the facilities around the mine. We have also a background in our society which is not very in favor of such activities, not only in Europe but also worldwide. There is a kind of reluctance to these extractive activities, so we have to set new rules regarding the sustainable mining that we could accept and that could bring some materials to the electrification, but also we are now facing geopolitics. A couple of months ago, geopolitics, there was a fierce competition between the major hub in the world to have access to the minerals, but now we are facing a new dilemma with the war in Ukraine, where the minerals are becoming part of this challenge and this rivalry in the different country. What the government is doing, we have not waited the last event to react. Since a couple of years, we have already think about our strategy. This strategy is based on several objectives. The first one is industrialization. Industrialization on what we can do and build it also around the different assets that we have already in our country is a key point for the success of the story of the electric vehicles in Europe. So there are some investments that have been put in place, especially by France. If I came to France, we are subsidizing some of the R&D, but also some of the facilities that are going out of the ground. We are also trying to build some partnerships with some friendly countries, especially abroad. So it's a new way of thinking the security of supply. France is not a mining country, that's not new for everyone, but we have still some assets on the mining industry that we have kept from our past. So we are trying to bring some materials to this asset, and we are working closely with some countries like Australia, Canada, but also with some other country in the Indian Pacific area. I think especially to Indonesia, which is a key player for nickel. And at the last point, I could just quickly mention that also we are thinking to develop some funding, and the state is thinking to have a fund in France that will go directly to finance some projects from the mine, but also to go up on the value chain.
Thank you very much, Jean-François. Turn again to you, Florence. You mentioned you're building gigafactories in Spain, France, and I believe in the UK as well. Got a question for you. Why coming to Europe? Why did you decide of implementing your factories in Europe at that point in time?
As all of speakers have mentioned, the European EV market is going to grow at a very, very fast speed. So currently in the market, you have around less than 50 gigawatt-hour production capacity. But in less than 10-year time, you will need around 800 gigawatt-hour capacity. And with the supply chain at this moment, mainly concentrated from players from Asia, from China, from Korea, from Japan, I think the European countries are raising the awareness that they need to build the value chain in Europe. So that is why we are seeing the growing markets driven on the one hand by the regulations to decarbonize the mobility sector. On the other hand, you have the need to develop the local supply chains. So there's a need and a growing market in the Europe EV market, and the European EV market is actually the third largest market in the world. And they are not only envision, more and more existing players of the EV industry are coming to Europe, establishing their production capacities here. You see a mix of investors or players in this domain. You see existing and established players like Envision, and other battery makers like Asian ones, LG and CATL coming to Europe to explore and develop this, I would say, underdeveloped market of EV battery. And you also see a growing number of startups that is also trying to grab a share in this market. So I think in 10 years' time, the huge demand driven by the EV market should be met by this mix of players, and where we see the opportunity to accompany with our client to succeed in the electrical mobility. So that is why this is the best timing to come to Europe to establish the production capacity now, because as we all know, the lead time to produce to install production capacity in Europe usually takes longer than what we have witnessed in, for example, in China. The average time where you install the gigafactory is less than 12 months. But here, you almost double or triple the time. So this is the critical timing, long lead time investment, but it is necessary to establish now to enter the market for Envision, and also, I believe, for all the other investors to the European market.
Thank you very much, Florence. And as you mentioned, there's plenty of capacity being developed in Europe today. From your perspective, this will require some significant raw materials. How do you secure both physically, both volumes, and manage the price of these raw materials to input into your gigafactories?
Yes, because we all know that the metals constitute the very important part of the cost of EV battery, and the EV battery in the end will make an important share of the cost of electrical vehicle. So to make the transition to EV electrical mobility more affordable, it is very key to secure the price of the metals. Envision, as an established player, we have been operating in the lithium battery industry for more than 15 years, and we are the leading pioneers in this industry. So we have established a very long-term existing relations with our suppliers. And as we are expanding to different locations of the world, in the UK, in France, in Spain, and also in Japan and in the US, we'll need a more diversified supply chain. So that is why we have started quite a long time ago to develop collaborations with our suppliers at different level, joint venture at a mines level, joint venture at the pre-cathode material manufacturing level, and also through a more typical long-term offtake agreement that secures the price and the volume. So this is two approaches. So basically, the existing established supply chain with our suppliers, and also you have to enter to the upper part of the supply chain through investment and joint ventures with the suppliers to secure the volume and the price, which is the general trend of the industry.
Thank you very much for this insight, Florence. Given time constraint, probably jump directly to an important topic which needs to be addressed when it comes to energy and metal supply, which is the environmental and social governance, as well as the ethical sourcing. As you may know, as you know, some supply chain, notably the solar panel, have come under scrutiny recently, and the mining is regularly challenged by NGOs due to its environmental and social impacts. Jim, do you want to ask the questions to our guests?
Absolutely, absolutely. Aaron, what steps are the U.S. gas industry taking to promote ESG principles? And I'll just ask the follow-up right away. And to what extent can you monitor whether those ESG principles are being followed by your suppliers, whether they be, in the form of capital or gas suppliers or any of your other subcontractors?
Apologies. Have to start with the advertisement for the industry to begin with. It's just a requirement. But again, LNG, natural gas, clean fuel burning, replacing lots of other dirtier fuel throughout the world. So we got to start with the right premise to the question. And you got to make sure that also when you compare and contrast the different sources of power that we're talking about, you're looking at everything full cycle. So you're comparing from the mining of the minerals, et cetera, like comparing things the same way with natural gas. But to your actual question, sorry. So look, I think LNG operators around the world are working to nonetheless continue to make things as green as possible. So we were the first large-scale electric motor-driven facility in the world. But now more of those are coming on, and people are actually changing up their permitting plans to make sure their facilities are electric driven. And in our case, and obviously as renewables continue to permeate throughout the world, and in more people's cases, I mean, about 30% plus of the Texas grid is renewable power. So our electric turbines are also being largely powered by renewables. So I mean that's a big factor. Several facilities, including ours, are now certifying their emissions to their off-takers. There's structures that I must confess are very challenging, but structures being put in place to tie renewable energy to the power production at the sites. And then Angie actually is leading responsibly sourced gas initiatives in the United States. Free advertisement. So they've been really spearheading that throughout the U.S. And every project, I think, to some extent, is looking hard at what they can do in the CCS space. It's not easy, but every project is looking at what they can do in that area as well. To your supplier question, that is more challenging. I think, at least to speak in the U.S., there's a lot of regulatory focus on them as well. I think perhaps even more importantly than the regulators, there is a lot of capital investment focus on them as well. In other words, they're not going to get any money unless they start measuring their emissions and doing a better job of capturing them, et cetera. So that's taking place throughout the U.S. gas supply chain.
Thanks very much. Very, very, very helpful, very insightful, Aaron. Florence, ESG is at the heart of your business, but beyond your performance, customers are looking for traceability and certification on end products. How do you control and certify your operations in your supply chain?
Well, actually, the ESG and the sustainability, these issues are very fundamental to the EV battery because we are building a transition which is going to phase out the traditional the ICE cars, but we have to be real green and real sustainable to make sure that this transition is on the right track. So it is fundamental to both for us and our end client to implement the traceability. So it is actually becoming an industry standard to establish the traceability of the value chain. We have to do a very thorough supplier audit. At the beginning, there will be the risk mapping to identify all the social, environmental, and human rights concerns that could probably surge in the EV value chain, and we need to implement a very important third-party due diligence on the value chain. It is the key, actually, and also key elements for companies to differentiate from others to be competitive. We are facing, I think every one of our industry is facing the quite important pressure from the customers to prove that your product is real sustainable. So I think, as Aaron mentioned, for the industry, which is heavily capital intensive, to secure financing, it is also a real stake to ensure that the project has a sustainable base. So only the real companies that implement the ESG principles can secure the financing and win the customers. So this is driving actually the positive change in the industry.
Great. Thanks very much, Florence. Jean-Francois, developing sovereign supply is going to be a key pillar, notably through recycling, but primary metal production is also on the agenda. Restarting exploration and reopening of mines, particularly in France, will face headwinds. How do you see things evolving in the future in that front?
It's a good question. Opening mine in France, I think it's there's a good future for mining in France. We have depleted a lot of our old mines in the last year. There is still a couple of them operating in France. We don't know it. They are well established in some area. Right now, the French state has launched some new research, and it's financing some research on a very specific area in France to make sure that we have new data on the ground, as we have a old knowledge on what we were looking on the past years. We want to bring for the market new data that can be used and that can provide some new projects. We have also a new mining code. That's the one we were using was quite a bit old. It was only focusing on financing and on the technical capability of the company. And now we have bring by all the SDGs in the mining code. So that's a great point. So now I think we are able to secure the projects that will be delivered in France, to make sure that if you get an exploration permit, you will be able at the end of the exploration permit, if you find something, to have a concession, and if you have a concession, you will have a mine. That's the main challenge. In the couple of months, I hope that there will be some news by some French company on this aspect, on the work they have done in France regarding mining and exploration. That's very interesting on that point. The other point I want to mention, that's regarding the battery regulation that is now close to the end at the European Commission. There's a strong interest in this battery regulation to make sure that the main component of the batteries will be procured on the sustainable way with a sustainable mining. So the European Commission is very as a front head to setting new standards regarding sustainable mining, not especially to defining one, but to make sure that the one which are already existing are fitting with our objective, especially linked to greenhouse gas emission, but also with all the challenge linked to the social acceptance and also the environmental preservation for the future generation.
As we're running out of time, well, I think we can give a great applause to our speakers. Thank you very much. Do you, dear audience, have one question? Any questions? James, you wanted to add something, please.
No, I just wanted to thank our panelists very much. I know we've probably gone over our allotted time by a little bit, but I think everyone was quite insightful and everybody had a different thought and process about how the transition is to go forward. And I think everyone added to this discussion. So I just wanted to say thank you very much to our panelists.
Thank you very much. A great applause to you again. Thank you.